Welcome everyone, my name is Enrique and welcome to the very first ever episode of the Mill City Grows podcast. So this very first episode, we're gonna be covering like the origin story of Mill City Grows, how Mill City Grows came to be like 10 years ago, and actually I think it was a little bit longer than that, so you're gonna discover that, but I don't want to spoil anything. So for this episode, my very first guest is going to be our executive director, Jessica Wilson. And like I said, we're going to be talking about the beginnings of Mill City Grows, how it came to be, and what it has become in these years. So I'm going to start with a little disclaimer before we jump into the interview. So I wanted to keep this episode a little bit shorter than what it is. So like I would say like a few minutes. So it's not that much longer than I wanted it to be, but it was such a good conversation that I was like, nah, like I have to keep this episode as a whole. And there was so many things that I learned myself, and I was like, oh, I'm the ultimate MCG historian over here. And then I was like, whoa, I did not know that. So that's pretty cool for me to learn throughout this interview. And I felt like I really could not cut anything. There was such a great conversation that I was like, no, everyone needs to hear everything of this. And I think like the moment that I decided to like actually cut the interview to where we're gonna be talking today, is like there was like a moment where we were like, oh, what time is it or something like that. So that's kind of where it kind of like stopped. But yeah, like so this part of the actually two parts, so that's the one other spoiler. So this conversation is a lot longer than this episode. We're gonna be talking about like I said, the beginnings until now, and the second part we're gonna be talking from now and going into the future. So I really hope you really enjoy this interview, and here we go. Hello, this is the first episode of the Mill City Grows podcast. What do you think?
Where we also talk about wrestling.
Well, we can talk about wrestling. Yeah, definitely.
That sounded like such a wrestling intro.
Oh, of course. I mean, like that's mostly
Mill City Grows podcast. No, I like it. I like it.
You like it? Okay,
yeah,
we can keep that. We can keep
fun.
that. All right. So with me on the very first episode, I have Jessica Wilson, who's the executive director here at Mill City Grows. And basically, the first thing I wanted to ask was just tell us about yourself, your relationship with Lowell, and how that evolved into becoming a member of Mill City Grows.
That's a big question, Enrique.
It is a big question.
And thank you for having me. I think it's really exciting to be on this first podcast. I'm a big fan of podcasting, as you know.
You're going to say you're a big fan of this podcast.
I'm a big fan of this podcast that we actually haven't even heard an episode yet. Mm-hmm. So about me, I have lived in Lowell for most of my life, or in or around Lowell. I was born here back in the 70s. And I've lived here, you know, in my younger years, in my adult years. I live in Tingsboro now, but Lowell, I have always considered home, no matter where I've gone in the world. And I think, you know, because I was really young and living in the Highlands at that period of time when like Lowell accepted thousands of refugees from Cambodia. And so, you know, that was the Lowell that I grew up in, right? Okay. And so I think that it is really cool to me that this community is so diverse, and I think growing up here, that's an expectation I have of any place that I live. And I think it's something that's really special about Lowell is that it's a city with such a deep history, and the folks that live here care about it so much, and we really do have a community that comes from all over the world. So my relationship with Mill City Grows, I actually was really close friends with the two women who co-founded Mill City Grows, Lydia Sisson and Francie Slater. I had worked with Lydia Sisson at another nonprofit in Lowell, and I knew she was really interested in food and farming. She actually left that job to start her own farm and did a CSA for a few years. It was in Greater Boston area. And I went out and helped her on the farm. I think I helped with garlic planting one year, and that was the first time I had ever been on a farm. So, really? So I am not like, I don't come to this work as somebody who's grown food and somebody who like was really passionate about that. I mean, I eat food. I like food. I really enjoy thinking about where my food comes from. And I've always really liked the idea that like food is, you know, you can put a lot into what you eat, and that makes it better. So like that, I appreciated all those ideas, but that was my first time I had kind of seen growing. And so when Lydia and Francie kind of came up with this idea of Mill City Grows, like, wow, there's all these people who would like more access to produce in Lowell. We have land that people aren't using, so there might be an opportunity to grow it here. And we can actually involve people in growing what they want because, as I said earlier, we have a super diverse community. And so the things that people are looking for, you know, to put into their home cooked meals are also really diverse.
Exactly.
So they kind of called upon me, not for my growing expertise because I didn't have any, but because I had worked in nonprofit for several years. I had done a lot of fundraising. I kind of knew the Lowell community pretty well. And so they invited me to come be part of like that first committee that got Mill City Grows off the ground. And I was here as a volunteer, you know, an advisory, like steering committee member, and then a board member for about 4 years.
4 years?
I think so. I actually I was nominated and elected the first board president of Mill City Grows. I think it was just because everybody was like, yeah, she'll do the work.
I knew you were in the board. I didn't know you were like the first elected president.
Oh, I was. And I worked really closely with Craig Thomas, who's currently on our board. So he was like my co-chair before we became an official nonprofit organization. And we had a lot of fun doing that together. He continued on the board, and I think we took roles as like president and vice president. So it was really fun in the sense that, you know, I was helping two of my friends kind of see this vision through. I was able to use some of my skills as a nonprofit fundraiser and an administrator to support them, and I was working with people that I knew and loved in the Lowell community, and so, you know, that's kept me here all these years, because I think what happened is I just fell in love with the work, and I fell in love with how we could change this community. You know, I think both physically, but then also in so many ways that aren't tangible, right? Yeah. So like all of these places that were vacant lots when I was growing up, they were places that people didn't want to walk because they didn't feel safe. They were places that, like, you know, you kind of tried not to look at, right? Those are places that are full of people now. They're places that are full of vegetables, right? They're places that are full of food. They're places that are full of community. So I think that was amazing to me, that this was possible with this kind of concentrated effort of all these people together. And the other thing that I loved, and I think this came from, you know, being part of the nonprofit community in Lowell, and always having as part of my mission was to, how can we bring people together, right? How can we serve everybody in an equitable way? How, and I, you know, I think specifically at one point in my career, I was working with immigrants and refugees and folks who are English language learners, and seeing how challenging it is to understand this system, like this government system, the school system. They're really complicated, you know, things to navigate. And especially when you don't have those native language skills.
Yeah, I mean, it happened to me, and I grew up in a place that technically, politically is the U.S.
Is the U.S.
Coming over here, it's a different country. Like, that's what I tell people. It's a different country, but yeah, like coming here, it was like, even like speaking English, like even though I knew it, it was like you would talk to me, and I would just look at you for a while, and then translate what you said in my mind into Spanish. Then I would just like translate again to what I was gonna say, and then I would say it. So it was like the buffering. You know what I mean?
Right. You need. I'm like, okay, first language into the second language, say it in the first language. You know, say it out loud in the second language. That is a really challenging thing to do, and I think that if you've never done it, which many people haven't, you take take it for granted. Right. That's possible. And I have very limited experience in this myself, but I've, you know, done some traveling in other countries where English was not the language of the community. And I am not super fluent in other languages. I can speak a little bit of French. I kind of understand Spanish on a good day. Kind of understand.
Kind of understand.
Can't speak it. Can't speak it.
I was going to say,
but kind of understand. You know, and it is really humbling to know what you want, to want to be able to ask for it, but you can't make yourself understood. Right. And that is something that I think with our garden spaces, right, our community gardens, because that was our first program that we started at Mill City Grows, I saw that this was a way that people could access a resource in a completely equitable way. And you know, Lydia and Francie and the team was very specific about doing outreach to people who wouldn't read the Lowell Sun, who wouldn't necessarily see it on Facebook, who wouldn't be in the community meeting, right? They made an effort to go to those places where folks who were speaking, you know, a different language, who went to a different, you know, religious celebration. And were able to bring that message and make those connections and invite people into that space. And that, to me, was the thing that really like lit the spark in me for this work. And like, I know that everybody needs food and everybody has a really like deep personal relationship with food, and to be able to eat the food you want and the food that you want to give your family is like such an integral part of feeling human. And so that's something at the root, like that's what the mission of Mill City Grows is all about. And that's what makes me so excited to continue doing this.
All right. Awesome. I really like that, but it also kind of, what's the word? It kind of talks a little bit of, you talk already what I meant to say, like about what was going to be my next question. Like kind of like how we started with the community gardens. That was like our first program and all that, and how you wanted to get involved in that in your community, and also like the vision that Francie and Lydia had of involving all these members of the community that usually are not like the most represented in any way. But like, can you also elaborate what was like the thing, or like the moment that sparked the you know, the creation of Mill City Grows, how it actually came to be? You know, like you talk from like how did you get involved perspective, but like how did it came to be for those who like may not like really know. Like I know. Right. You were here too, so you know.
I was there. Yeah, I think it's an interesting story too, because it's, you know, I think a lot of people might think, oh, well, you know, the women who started Mill City Grows just came up with this idea and did everything and it was great. But there were so many people who along the way kind of contributed to this vision and made it possible. So I think the spark of the idea came from, there was a study that Lydia was doing as part of her master's degree at UMass Lowell, to kind of understand like what was the food system in Lowell and was it serving everybody? And so she surveyed, I think, hundreds of people throughout the city. She convened a steering committee and came back with this data that showed her that 40% of the people she interviewed were not able to get all the food they needed for themselves and their family. And that on top of that, you know, the biggest reasons why were they didn't have access to a place to buy their food. And if they could get to a place to buy food, it didn't have the food they wanted. And it was too expensive. And the biggest gap of all the different kinds of food that people wanted was produce, fresh produce. And culturally connected. I think we called it culturally relevant at the time.
At the time, it changed a lot since I actually come here.
The language has changed, but the idea being, you know, the things that are relevant in your cultural cuisine.
Your culture,
and so, you know, she completed that research and kind of came up with this, you know, what could we do to try to alleviate some of these issues? And she came up with a lot of ideas. And I think one was, you know, doing more local farming. One was kind of having different places where people could buy produce. But the one I think that resonated and that there was some possibility for at the very beginning was creating a community garden. And so, you know, we had an ally that was working at the city at the time who said, you know, we can kind of investigate some places where this might be possible. And we found a park where in South Lowell where, you know, it was shaped in such a way, there happened to be a little piece of it that was just like not really being used. And that the city said, you know, if we can turn this into a resource for the neighborhood, that would make a lot of sense. And so we worked really closely with the city to create an a community gardens policy. So this is something that actually, and this, this is, I think, a great thing to share with people. Anybody who wants to start a community garden, not just Mill City Grows, can look at this policy and make a proposal for doing this work. Yeah. There's a very specific way we work with the city, so we can license land that's owned by the city. We set up beds in a specific way. We're only able to, allocate them to one bed per family, and we provide programming to make sure that it's clean and it's running well, and we can make sure that we are providing all the services that people need to be successful. Yeah. So that was kind of the initial idea. And I think it wouldn't have happened, without like all the input from the people in that original study, and the steering committee that was part of it. I think without the real support from the City of Lowell Department of Planning and Development was really behind this idea. And I think one of the things that is really great at that period of time, and still today, definitely, is that the city is really committed to the idea of sustainability. Mm-hmm. And so local food is a great way to support environmental sustainability. Yes. And it's also a wonderful support for community members, right? Yeah. And it's cutting down on like carbon emissions and all that stuff. So that was the very first, like, how it all came to be.
It's kind of interesting that you say that, because like for me, when I first got involved into Mill City Grows, the last 2 points that you made were actually the things that kind of like wanted me to like get into like this type of work too, because like I was like always thinking about environmental sustainability, but also about like where's the food that I want to eat at the supermarket, like I was like younger, and I don't want to be eating ramen noodles. First, I don't really care about ramen noodles, and also they're not something I like. You know what I mean? Right. Like, it's not what I grew up eating. I want to eat my rice and beans with like, you know what I mean? Right. Especially better if they're locally grown, like, you know what I mean, or like exchange some of that, like, like I grew up exchanging food with like neighbors. I'd be like, hey, you want like breadfruit? I'll give you some passion fruit in exchange, and they'll be like, okay,
That's
like,
so great.
I'd be like, hey, like, I want some of that chicken soup you're doing. It's like, well, can you help me gut these chickens? And I'll be like, yeah, I'll go there. Like legit, I will go to my neighbor's house and like just like help him like take all the chickens out, and then like in exchange I would just get soup for chicken soup.
and I mean that's incredible too, right? Because everybody shares the resources, everybody gets fed, you learn, right? A new skill. So now you understand like what goes into making this soup. And it's building community, exactly. Right? And I think as you know, because you have been the manager of the community gardens program, like building community is as important as the food, because I think a community's strength comes from the relationships within. And so like to have that kind of relying upon each other to get the things that you need, which people can do in a community garden space. It's a little bit harder to do in an urban environment when people are kind of all in their little apartments and boxes and things like that, and they don't share as much public space. Those relationships are harder to build, but but kind of creating these spaces where people can come together and get to know each other and share food and trade food,
or even meet each other.
And meet each other.
I have people that live next door to each other for years and they never knew each other, and now they're really good friends. Like,
yes,
just because of the community garden.
That right, and that those relationships, like when things happen, where you need extra resources or you have extra resources to spare, you now have that relationship that you can talk to your neighbor and share those things. So I think, that it's so interesting, when you were talking about coming here, from Puerto Rico, and that you couldn't find the food you wanted, like how much of our population here in Lowell is from Puerto Rican descent? Many people. And so clearly those food resources have to be here somewhere. And it's really getting to know the community and who has access to those resources. Where do you go to get them? And that like navigating that must have been really important through your time here to kind of find your place, right? Exactly. Find your food home. And it's not always easy to do when you're in a new community and you haven't met anybody and you don't really know where anything is yet.
Exactly. And also the context in which you move too.
Yes.
So like a lot of people move here in very different context and
Oh,
situation.
for sure.
So, and cut. This is where I'm gonna leave it over here because this is where we stopped our conversation up to the present, and where we started our conversation from the present to the future. So you just heard pretty much from the beginnings of Mill City Girls, like I was talking earlier, the origin story until the time being. And now now that you know Mill City Girls, this is where we're gonna be going from on the next episode. And I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was a blast having this conversation, and whether you're gardening, whether you're like driving, are working on the desk while you're listening to this, I really hope you liked it and that you join us for the next episode in whichever way you like to listen to your radio shows / podcasts. And yeah, I am going to sign off for the time being. Until the next time, see you later. I'm Enrique. Goodbye.